Purpose: this part introduces the mystery surrounding the warship and sets the stage for the unfolding drama. The hook should draw the audience in immediately, with a shocking reveal that raises questions. The first part will lay the foundation for the entire story and build intrigue, promising twists and suspense that will keep the viewers hooked. In the depths of uncharted space, a signal pulsed, a beacon of unknown origin. The alien fleet, vast and powerful, moved toward it with the swiftness and precision that only centuries of advanced technology could provide. They had tracked the signal for days, their curiosity piqued by the strange energy patterns it emitted. The fleet's commanders exchanged curious glances. It was clear this was something unusual, something far beyond anything they'd encountered before. Then, they saw it. The warship. At first glance, it appeared to be a relic, something from a long-forgotten age, built from crude materials, its structure lopsided and imperfect. But as they moved closer, the alien scanners began to detect something more. A terrifying realization gripped their minds. What they had assumed was a piece of ancient technology, discarded and useless, was a functioning warship. And not just any warship. This one was built by humans. The aliens froze, their minds racing. The warship's construction defied everything they knew about humanity. How could they, with their primitive tools and lack of galactic technology, possibly construct something so formidable? One alien officer, his voice trembling with disbelief, spoke aloud. They built it, out of what? The question hung in the air, unanswered, as the fleet's commanders issued orders to surround the vessel. Every member of the alien fleet knew that this discovery, this unbelievable turn of events, would change everything. Humans, those strange, stubborn beings they had dismissed for so long, had somehow built a weapon capable of taking down even the most advanced forces in the galaxy. And the aliens knew it. They had to find out how. Inside the warship, the human crew scrambled to prepare for what seemed to be an inevitable confrontation. Among them was the ship's creator, a quiet, humble engineer who had never once considered the implications of his work. He had only wanted to build something to protect his people, never imagining that he would become the center of an intergalactic mystery. As the tension mounted outside, the human captain, the engineer's longtime friend, stared out at the stars, a deep worry etched across his face. The warship's design had been a culmination of years of work, a blend of scavenged Earth technologies and unimaginable human creativity. But he feared it wasn't enough. The aliens were powerful, and their fleet was overwhelming. "Do you think they'll leave us alone?" the captain asked, his voice barely a whisper. The engineer turned to face him, his face stoic, but his eyes betraying the weight of the decision he had made. "No. They'll want to understand it. They'll want to know how we did this. And if they can't understand?" The captain's voice was tight with fear. The engineer sighed, his expression unreadable. "If they can't understand, they'll destroy it." The silence between them was heavy. Neither spoke, both knowing that the fate of their people rested on the ship that seemed so out of place, so far beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. Outside, the alien fleet closed in, their ships now surrounding the human vessel in a perfect formation. A single voice came through the communications channel, its tone cold and commanding. "This is the fleet of the Galactic Council," the voice announced. "We have come to investigate the ship. Do not resist. Surrender now, and we will ensure your safety." The captain gripped the controls of the ship, trying to steady his shaking hands. The engineer, standing beside him, took a deep breath and spoke with the calmness that had always marked his personality. "They don't understand," he said softly. "They think they're dealing with an ancient relic. They won't be happy when they realize the truth," the captain muttered, looking out at the alien fleet. His voice was tinged with disbelief. "They've never seen anything like this before." The engineer turned to him, eyes shining with determination. "Let's make sure they never forget." The aliens were approaching, but what they didn't realize was that they weren't facing a forgotten relic of the past. No, this warship was something entirely different, a human creation born of desperation, innovation, and an unwavering will to survive. The crew inside had built it out of scraps, blending the old with the new, repurposing every bit of Earth's discarded technology they could get their hands on. It had taken years, but they had succeeded. They had created a warship. Not just any ship, but a vessel that could stand up to the most powerful forces in the galaxy. And now, it was time to face the unknown. In the distance, the alien fleet slowly began to close in, their ships glistening under the distant stars. The human crew's hearts raced, knowing that the next moments would define everything. Would they survive this alien encounter? Would the warship's shocking design be enough to make them a force to be reckoned with? The engineer, standing at the helm, glanced out at the stars once more. His mind raced with the possibilities, but deep down, he knew one thing for sure: humanity had just made its mark on the galaxy. And no matter what happened next, the aliens would never look at Earth the same way again. This part will delve into the backstory of how the human crew built the warship. It will explore the challenges they faced, the sacrifices made, and the unyielding determination that drove them to succeed where others might have given up. The twists here will reveal the raw, untold story behind the ship's creation, building up to the emotional impact of the alien fleet's arrival and the crew's determination to protect their legacy. The warship, though impressive in its own right, wasn't born from the grand designs of a superpower or the resources of a wealthy nation. It was born from the raw spirit of survival. It had started as a simple idea in a broken-down workshop, conceived by a handful of engineers and a few resourceful dreamers who saw the impending doom of Earth's collapse. They knew that humanity could not rely on the scraps of past glory; it needed something new, something born from the ashes of the old world. The engineer, who had once been a part of the world's greatest minds in Earth's final years, stood in the middle of that dusty workshop. It was here, in the heart of a decaying civilization, that he began his work. There was no funding from governments, no backing from organizations, just an overwhelming will to protect his family, his friends, and his people. The beginning was humble. "We can't rely on space stations," he had said to the small group of survivors who had gathered around him. "We need something better. Something we can call our own." His words were met with silence, but only for a moment. A young woman, one of the few mechanics left on Earth, had spoken up. "What do you have in mind?" "A warship. A ship built from what we have left," he had replied, his voice steady despite the uncertainty of the idea. The group was doubtful, but the desperation in his eyes pushed them to work. If they didn't try, if they didn't fight, they would never survive the coming storms. The ship, like its creators, was a patchwork of Earth's past. They scoured old factories, abandoned military bases, and forgotten scrapyards, picking up pieces of anything they could find. Old fighter jets, rusted tanks, spacecraft debris, anything with metal, engines, or advanced technology. But it wasn't just about the materials. It was about understanding how to repurpose them in ways the world had long forgotten. They didn't have the luxury of modern science; they had to make do with what they knew. But the engineer, who had once been an aerospace technician, understood. He knew that the ingenuity of the human spirit could overcome any obstacle. His crew was small, less than 50 people, but each one shared his vision. They worked tirelessly, day after day, without rest. They tore down old systems and built new ones. They found energy sources where others saw waste. And slowly, they created something no one thought possible: a warship capable of withstanding the harshest of environments and the fiercest of battles. The warship wasn't built in the traditional sense. There were no elaborate blueprints, no perfect measurements. It was a creation born of necessity, driven by passion and perseverance. They worked in the shadows, never knowing if their efforts would even matter, if they would even live long enough to see it take flight. But then came the day the engine roared to life. The crew was standing around the hull when the first test engine fired up. It was shaky, a low hum at first, followed by a louder roar that rattled the entire workshop. The walls groaned under the pressure, but the ship didn't falter. It stood there, a monument to humanity's will to survive. One of the engineers, a young man with a passion for space travel, had punched the air in triumph. "We did it. We built it." But it wasn't enough yet. The warship still had no weaponry, no advanced shielding, and no clear plan for what came next. They needed to test it, to push it beyond its limits and see if it could survive the unimaginable. For months, the crew worked without rest. They fought to make the ship more than just a vessel, they made it a symbol of humanity's resilience. The weapon systems were designed from old military stockpiles, scavenged and retrofitted to suit the ship's needs. The shields were built from layers of scrap metal and hardened alloys that had once been used to fortify city walls. Nothing was as it should have been, but everything worked. Against all odds, they were creating something the galaxy had never seen before. But the crew knew time was running out. The aliens had been scouting Earth for years, gathering intel on the remnants of humanity. The engineers' worst fears had always been that their work would be discovered, and that the aliens would see them as a threat. One evening, after a particularly grueling shift, the engineer had stood at the helm, gazing out at the stars through the viewport. "Do you think we're ready?" his friend, the ship's captain, asked from behind him. The engineer hesitated, unsure. "I think we have no choice but to be ready." The captain clapped him on the shoulder. "Then we'll do it. We'll make sure Earth survives, no matter what." It was the resolve in his voice that convinced the engineer that they could make it. The ship was far from perfect, but it was the only hope humanity had. It wasn't built for fame or glory. It was built for survival. It was built for people like him and the crew who believed they could defy the odds. And for the first time since the project had begun, the engineer allowed himself to believe it, too. Meanwhile, the alien fleet had gathered in orbit, studying the signal they had been tracking for days. They had never encountered a species so primitive, yet so determined. What they had failed to realize was that humanity's greatest strength wasn't technology or weapons, it was their spirit, their ability to adapt, to innovate, and to survive when the odds were against them. As the warship ascended into the skies of Earth, the aliens couldn't help but wonder, what had they missed? How had humans managed to build something so potent, so advanced, without their intervention? The answer was simple: humanity had built it out of necessity. The warship was a symbol of their last stand, a testament to their ingenuity and unwillingness to give up, no matter the cost. This part will escalate the tension, revealing the true scale of the impending alien threat. The crew of the warship faces its first encounter with the alien fleet, and their resourcefulness and determination will be tested to the limit. This part will also introduce new challenges as the warship is pushed into combat for the first time, with unexpected consequences that deepen the mystery and raise the stakes. The morning had come too soon. The warship was ready, at least, in the way that the crew had always imagined it. The engines hummed with a power they had never dared dream of, and the weapon systems were calibrated and primed. But the feeling in the pit of the engineer's stomach told him something none of them had prepared for: they were about to face something far greater than themselves. The aliens weren't just invaders, they were something else entirely. Intelligent. Methodical. Ruthless. As the warship left Earth's atmosphere, the crew could see the vastness of space stretching before them. It was a beautiful sight, but one that held the weight of their mission. Their small, makeshift ship seemed like nothing more than a speck in the black void. "Status?" the captain asked, his voice calm but tinged with apprehension. "All systems operational, Captain," the engineer replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "We're ready." But as they continued their ascent, a chill ran through the crew. A dark shadow appeared in the distance, growing steadily larger. It was impossible to miss: the alien fleet was arriving. The alien ships were unlike anything they had ever seen. Sleek, dark, and foreboding, their hulls glinted with an eerie sheen, suggesting a level of technology far beyond humanity's own. There were dozens of them, each one seemingly a city unto itself, brimming with weapons and advanced systems. Their sheer size was overwhelming, dwarfing the human ship, which now seemed so fragile in comparison. The crew stared in silence, unsure of what to do. They had never imagined facing something this advanced, this terrifying. It felt as though the ship, despite its power, was a mere child's toy in the presence of a storm. The captain's voice broke the silence. "Prepare for combat. We might not survive this, but we'll make them fight for every inch." A cold resolve settled over the crew. They had come this far, sacrificed so much, and they would not back down now. The first few moments were eerily quiet. Then, without warning, the aliens opened fire. The warship jolted under the impact of the alien lasers, shaking violently as the crew scrambled to maintain control. The engineer worked quickly, adjusting the shields to absorb the impact, but it was clear that their ship was outmatched. "Shields at 70%, cried the weapons officer, panic rising in his voice. "We can't hold this much longer." The captain's eyes narrowed. "Then we fight back. Bring the weapons online." The engineer quickly activated the weapons systems. Despite the crude nature of their design, the weapons on the ship were powerful enough to cause damage, if they could hit their target. The first blast fired out, a streak of energy that struck the lead alien ship, sending a shockwave through the alien fleet. But it was only a small victory. The alien ships retaliated in force, and the warship took another hit. The ship shuddered violently, and the engineer was thrown against the control panel. He scrambled to his feet, fighting against the disorienting wave of dizziness. "Damage report," the captain demanded, his voice tight with urgency. "We've lost external communications," shouted one of the crew members. "Engines are still holding, but the hull is taking significant damage." "Keep it together," the captain ordered. "We're not done yet." The warship's guns fired again, but this time, the alien ships had anticipated their move. A sudden barrage of energy blasts from the aliens overwhelmed the human ship's defenses, tearing through the outer hull. The crew, now in full survival mode, fought to keep their ship intact. The engineer moved rapidly through the control panels, recalibrating everything he could, but it was clear that they were fighting a losing battle. The aliens were simply too advanced. Then, in the middle of the chaos, a new alarm blared. It was an incoming transmission, a signal from the alien fleet. "Captain," the communications officer called out. "They're speaking to us." On screen, the captain barked. The crew watched as the image of a tall, humanoid alien flickered onto the screen. His face was stern, cold, and unfeeling, like a warrior born of war and conquest. His eyes seemed to pierce straight through the crew. "You have no place in this galaxy," the alien said, his voice both commanding and chilling. "Surrender now, and we may spare you." The captain's fists clenched. "We'll never surrender." The alien didn't flinch. "Then you will die." Just as the alien was about to give the order to fire, the engineer's eyes widened. There, in the distance, a strange phenomenon appeared, an anomaly, unlike anything they had seen before. It wasn't a ship or a weapon, it was a rift in space, a swirling vortex that seemed to pulse with energy. "Captain, look," the engineer shouted. "That's no natural occurrence. It could be a wormhole. It might lead to another system, a way out." The captain studied the anomaly, calculating the risk. There was no guarantee it would lead to safety, but it was their only option. "Full speed ahead. We're taking that rift." As the warship barreled toward the rift, the alien fleet fired once more, but this time, the crew was ready. The shields flared bright, absorbing the full brunt of the blast. The warship tore through the alien fire, and with one final push, it entered the rift. The universe around them seemed to warp, the stars bending and stretching as they plunged into the unknown. A sudden explosion of light blinded the crew, and when it faded, they were no longer in the same space. They had traveled far beyond the reach of the alien fleet. The relief was palpable, but it didn't last long. "We made it," the captain whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. But the engineer knew something else. This wasn't over. The rift had led them into uncharted space, into the unknown. And somewhere, beyond the rift, the alien fleet was still pursuing them, just waiting for the right moment to strike again. Purpose. This part deepens the mystery, revealing a hidden part of the galaxy that humanity had forgotten about, a place where ancient human civilizations once thrived. This forgotten world may hold the answers to the alien threat, but also presents new dangers that the crew must navigate. Tension continues to rise as the warship encounters strange, unexpected phenomena. The rift had closed behind them, leaving nothing but the eerie silence of the unknown. The crew, though still shaken by the battle they had just survived, knew they couldn't afford to relax. They were in uncharted space, far from anything they knew. No maps. No communications. No way to reach home. The captain stood at the front of the bridge, his eyes fixed on the view screen. The stars had changed. They weren't in the familiar section of space they'd known their whole lives. The constellations were unfamiliar, the nebulae strange. It was a vast, dark ocean, and the crew was adrift in it. The engineer was the first to speak. "Captain. I don't know where we are. These stars don't match anything on our charts." The captain's gaze didn't waver. "We don't need charts right now. We need answers." A low hum from the communications officer broke the silence. "Captain, there's something ahead. A planet." The screen flickered to life, showing a distant, rocky planet. It wasn't large, but it was habitable. And there, nestled in the planet's atmosphere, was a cluster of ancient, crumbling structures. At first, the crew thought it was a trick of the light. But as they drew closer, it became undeniable. "It's a city, or it used to be," said the captain, his voice tinged with disbelief. "What happened here?" The engineer stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. This is unlike anything I've seen. The architecture doesn't match any known human designs. It's older than anything we could have built, even in our prime." A shiver ran through the crew as the realization hit. This wasn't just a forgotten colony. This was an ancient world, lost to time, possibly even before humanity had reached the stars. The crew had stumbled upon something far older than they could have imagined. The captain's eyes hardened. "Prepare for landing. We'll find out what happened here." The descent to the planet was slow and cautious. The crew knew better than to rush into unknown territory, but the mystery of the abandoned city was too great to ignore. The ship touched down on a barren plateau, its engines humming softly as the crew disembarked, armed and ready for anything. As they stepped onto the planet's surface, they were greeted by the eerie silence of the long-abandoned city. The buildings stood like ghostly sentinels, their stone walls covered in moss and vines. It was as if time had forgotten this place, leaving it to decay in isolation. The crew spread out, scanning the area for signs of life, or anything that could explain the planet's desolation. There were no signs of human life, no footprints in the dirt. But there were signs of technology, advanced technology. Strange metallic panels embedded in the walls. Machinery that seemed to hum with a faint, otherworldly energy. The crew's breath caught in their throats as they realized this wasn't just a dead city. It was a relic of an ancient human civilization, one that had left behind incredible secrets. One of the crew members, a young officer, approached a strange device embedded in the center of a grand square. His fingers brushed against the smooth surface, and to his surprise, the device flickered to life. A low, mechanical hum filled the air, followed by a distorted voice that echoed from the speakers. "Welcome, travelers. The crew froze, eyes wide with shock. The voice was unmistakably human, but it was warped, as though distorted by centuries of decay. Who is this?" the captain asked, his voice steady despite the disbelief settling in his chest. The voice on the other end crackled again. "I am, the last, of the ancients. The guardians of the human race." A cold wave of realization washed over the crew. The voice wasn't just a relic of the past, it was a message, a warning. Whoever had lived on this world, they had known of humanity's rise, perhaps even its fall. The guardians of the human race. The captain repeated, his mind racing. What happened here? But the voice didn't respond. Instead, a strange pulse of energy shot from the device, sending a shockwave through the crew. The ground trembled, and for a moment, the sky above them darkened. "Get back to the ship," the captain barked. "Now!" The crew sprinted back to the warship, the tremors shaking the planet beneath them. As they boarded the ship, the communications officer reported another strange signal, a pulse of energy emanating from the city. "Captain, it's like a beacon," she said. "I think it's calling something." "Calling what?" the captain asked, his voice thick with concern. Before the communications officer could respond, the warship's sensors pinged, and a new, terrifying signal appeared on their screens. Hundreds of alien ships, just like the ones that had attacked them before, were appearing in the distance, drawn to the planet by the strange signal. "The aliens found us," the engineer muttered under his breath. "They've been tracking us since the rift." The crew raced to prepare the warship for takeoff, but they knew their situation was dire. The alien fleet was closing in fast, and their ship was still far from ready to fight again. "We need to get out of here, now," the captain ordered. But as the warship's engines roared to life, the planet below them began to tremble once more. The pulse from the ancient city intensified, and the warship was struck by a sudden jolt, a powerful force that knocked them off course. "What the hell was that?" the engineer shouted, his voice panicked. "Not now," the captain yelled, gripping the controls. "We've got to move." But the pull of the ancient signal was too strong. They were caught in its grasp. This part will raise the stakes as the crew realizes that the ancient city is not just a forgotten relic, but a powerful weapon that could turn the tide in their fight against the alien fleet. Tensions escalate as they try to understand how to use this weapon, while facing obstacles, alien forces, and a shocking betrayal. The stakes are high, and the danger of failure looms. The warship's engines roared as the crew tried to pull away from the gravitational pull of the planet. The alien fleet was closing in fast, their ship's dark shapes against the distant stars. The captain's hands gripped the controls, but no matter how much he pushed, they weren't moving fast enough. Come on, he muttered under his breath, sweat beading on his forehead. "Captain," the communications officer called out, her voice trembling, "the alien ships, they're locking onto us. They've already engaged their weapons." The captain swore under his breath. They were caught in a trap. But then something happened, something unexpected. A sudden, blinding flash of light filled the bridge, and the ship lurched forward. It was as if an invisible force had taken hold of them, dragging them toward the planet. "What the hell is happening?" the engineer shouted, panic creeping into his voice. "We're being pulled in," the captain yelled. "Brace for impact." But instead of slamming into the surface, the ship was suddenly hovering just above the ancient city. The force field surrounding it was now active, and the crew could feel the immense energy radiating from the city. The screens flickered, showing the distant alien fleet, struggling against the same force field. But it wasn't just a field, it was something much more. "Is this the signal?" the communications officer asked, eyes wide in disbelief. "It's more than just a signal," the captain replied, his mind racing. "This is a weapon. The ancients, they designed it to pull in anything within range and crush it." But then, something else caught their attention. A strange hum echoed through the ship, followed by a deep, resonating voice, a voice that seemed to come from within the ship itself. Warning. Unauthorized activation of defense mechanism. System override detected. Wait, what? The engineer muttered. The ship's systems, they're reacting to the ancient technology? Before anyone could answer, the ship's systems flickered, and the hum grew louder. Suddenly, the entire ship shuddered violently, throwing everyone off balance. The warship systems are locking out, the engineer yelled, struggling to regain control of the ship. Keep it together, the captain barked. We need to understand what this is. There's a chance we can turn it off, but we have to figure out how. The crew quickly realized that the warship was no longer in full control. The ancient city's power was overriding their systems, its defense mechanism taking command. The ship was now tethered to the city, like a puppet on strings. The alien fleet, still trapped in the same gravitational pull, was now helpless, but the crew had no idea what the next move was. We need to find out how to control this thing before it destroys us, the captain said, his voice grim. We've got no choice, the engineer muttered. The technology, it's unlike anything we've seen before. It's not just alien, it's human. Human? The communications officer's voice was filled with disbelief. What do you mean, human? I mean, this technology doesn't look like it was built by aliens. It looks like it was designed by us. By humans, in another time, another place. The crew froze. The implications were staggering. Could this weapon, this entire city, be a product of an ancient human civilization, lost to the sands of time? What happened to them? The captain asked, his voice a whisper. The engineer shook his head. I don't know. But this tech, it's centuries ahead of anything we've ever built. As the crew tried to make sense of the situation, the reality of their peril hit them hard. The alien ships, though stuck in the same trap, were still capable of launching devastating attacks. The crew was stuck, unable to defend themselves, unable to escape. But the hum of the ancient city's weapon seemed to intensify. There was a distinct change in the atmosphere, as though the very air was charged with energy. The captain glanced at the screen, his heart racing. Look at that. The energy levels are increasing. The communications officer's fingers flew over the controls. Sir, I think it's powering up. Can we use it? The captain asked, a hint of desperation creeping into his voice. I don't know, the engineer replied, shaking his head. We don't understand how it works. But if we don't figure it out soon, it'll destroy everything around us. Just then, a voice echoed through the ship again, deeper and more commanding than before. Warning. System malfunction imminent. Defense mechanism engaged. Detonation in T-5 minutes. The crew's blood ran cold. The crew is faced with a moral dilemma as they attempt to control the ancient weapon, which has the power to annihilate both the alien fleet and their own ship. Tensions rise as one of the crew members offers an unprecedented solution, one that could save them but at a great cost. The emotional stakes are high, and the captain must make a decision that will change everything. The countdown on the ship's central screen flashed with relentless precision. T-3 minutes. The bridge was thick with tension. The hum of the ancient city's power had become deafening, a constant vibration that rattled the very bones of the crew. The alien fleet, still trapped by the gravitational pull of the city, continued to fire sporadically, mostly in vain, as their weapons bounced harmlessly off the invisible energy shields surrounding the city. But that wouldn't last forever. Captain, the communications officer shouted, her voice strained. If we don't deactivate this weapon in 2 minutes, it's going to trigger a full-scale detonation. It's already too late to escape the blast radius. The captain's eyes darted from one crew member to the next. Panic was starting to spread among them, some were already prepping escape pods, others attempting to re-establish communication with their home fleet. "We don't have much time," he muttered under his breath, looking at the engineer, who was still desperately working to override the ship systems. "We've tried everything," the engineer snapped, his fingers flying over the console. "The systems are locked out. This is beyond anything I've ever seen. We need someone to manually activate the shutdown sequence." Just then, one of the crew members, Lieutenant Parker, stepped forward with a determined look in his eyes. He was the one who had been quiet all along, observing the situation from the edges. Now, he spoke up with a voice that cut through the chaos. "I can do it," Parker said, his voice steady. "I've been studying the data from the ancient city's mainframe. It's not as alien as we thought. It's human tech. I can override the sequence." The captain turned to him, disbelief flickering in his eyes. "What do you mean, human tech? How could you possibly?" "I know how to shut it down," Parker continued, his gaze unwavering. "But the system is complicated. It requires a manual input from someone who understands the core programming. I can do it. But..." He hesitated, his voice faltering for just a moment. "But it's risky. It might take the whole system offline, or worse, activate a self-destruct mechanism that could take down the city and the alien fleet with it. I won't survive it." The silence in the room was suffocating. Every crew member turned toward Parker, the weight of his words hanging in the air. He was offering them salvation, but at a personal cost. The captain's mind raced. Could he let one of his own sacrifice themselves to save the rest? Could he risk the weapon's detonation in the hope that it would destroy the alien threat once and for all? "Are you sure?" the captain asked, his voice tight. Parker nodded. "I've made my peace with it. We can't afford to fail now." But as the captain's eyes scanned the crew, a feeling of dread settled over him. A cold, creeping sense of something being wrong. The engineer's face had gone pale. "No, we don't need to make that sacrifice. There's another way. If we initiate the manual override from the engine core, I can make it respond in time. If we all work together, we can shut down the weapon without triggering the detonation sequence." "That's a risk," Parker countered. "The core's power output is volatile. If we tamper with it, we may trigger a meltdown, and the whole city will collapse. Not just us, but everyone in range." "But if we don't act now," the communications officer said, her voice trembling, "we'll all be dead anyway." The captain stood motionless, torn between two paths, neither of them safe. One crew member was willing to sacrifice his life, while another believed there was a chance to solve it without any loss of life, but the stakes were just as high either way. "How much time do we have left?" the captain asked, his voice quiet but firm. "Less than a minute," the communications officer replied. "And the alien fleet is already trying to make a final assault." The weight of the decision pressed down on the captain like a leaden weight. He had been trained for this kind of moment, but that didn't make it any easier. Suddenly, Parker's voice broke through the tension. "Captain, please, don't let this be for nothing. This is my choice to make. I can end this, once and for all. You just have to trust me." For a brief moment, the captain locked eyes with Parker. He saw the resolve in his eyes, the willingness to lay down his life for the good of the crew. It was a moment that would shape the course of history, the kind of selfless sacrifice that humanity was known for. "Do it," the captain said, his voice heavy with the weight of the decision. "Shut it down, Parker. Save us all." Parker gave a solemn nod and turned toward the control panel. He moved swiftly, his fingers dancing across the keys with purpose, each movement calculated. As he worked, the countdown continued, ticking down the precious seconds. But just as Parker neared the final step of his override process, the ship shuddered. A deep rumble filled the entire structure, and the lights flickered. The alien fleet had launched their final barrage. "No!" Parker yelled. "It's too late." Before anyone could react, a massive explosion rocked the ship. The force sent everyone stumbling, and the ship's walls groaned under the pressure. Parker's fingers were still pressed to the console, but the ship was no longer under control. The crew is now confronted with the true nature of the weapon's power, realizing that their victory has come at a dangerous cost. They must make one final, agonizing choice: either risk everything to destroy the weapon or live with the knowledge that humanity may never be safe from its reach. The emotional stakes are higher than ever, and the crew must make a decision that will define their legacy. This conclusion will offer a profound life lesson, emphasizing humanity's resilience and the sacrifices made for the greater good. The warship shuddered again, this time with a deep, ominous vibration that rattled the very structure of the ship. Captain Jackson stood at the helm, his eyes fixed on the central core of the ancient city, the source of the power that had destroyed the alien fleet in an instant. Though the immediate threat had passed, the realization hit hard. The weapon's power was far from spent. In fact, it seemed to be growing stronger by the minute, drawing energy from the very fabric of the city itself. The crew could feel it, like a distant storm gathering strength. "Captain," the communications officer's voice was shaky. "We've just received a transmission from the fleet. They're reporting massive energy readings coming from the city. It's beyond anything we've ever seen. This weapon, it's still active. It could destroy every living thing in this galaxy if we don't stop it." Jackson's face went pale. He stared at the display, which showed a countdown, longer than the one before, but just as ominous. "How much time do we have?" "Not long," she answered. "Less than an hour." An overwhelming silence fell over the bridge. The crew had been preparing to celebrate their victory, but now, they were standing on the precipice of a far greater crisis. "Wait," said the engineer, looking up from his console. His brow furrowed. "I've just decoded some of the ancient city's archives. This weapon, it's not just a weapon. It's a fail-safe, a self-replicating system designed to destroy any advanced civilizations that might come too close. If it's not destroyed, it will eventually expand, seeking out the most powerful civilizations and wiping them out. And it won't stop." Jackson's mind raced. He turned toward Lieutenant Parker's empty station, the man who had sacrificed his life to shut down the alien fleet. He had saved them all, but at a cost. And now, the thing he had saved them from was bigger than anyone could have imagined. "How do we destroy it?" Jackson asked, his voice calm, but internally, his heart was pounding. This was their last chance. If they didn't act now, the entire galaxy could be at risk. The engineer looked up, hesitation clear in his eyes. "There's a way. But it's risky. We need to reach the core of the city. The power source. If we can overload it from the inside, we can trigger a chain reaction that will destabilize the entire system. It will take the weapon down, but it will also destroy the city, and possibly everything within 100 light-years." The captain absorbed the information, and the weight of the decision bore down on him like 1,000 tons. If they destroyed the weapon, they would eliminate the immediate threat, but it would also mean the end of the city, and perhaps their own ship, too. But if they didn't act, the weapon would inevitably escape its confines and wreak havoc on the galaxy. There was no middle ground. "How much time do we have before the core reaches full capacity?" Jackson asked. 30 minutes, the engineer replied, eyes wide with urgency. "If we don't reach it by then, it could be too late to stop the process. The weapon's power will be irreversible." Jackson's mind was made up. There was no question. This was humanity's test, to stop the ultimate force of destruction, or to live in fear of what might come. "We're going," he said, turning to the crew. "Prepare for an all-out assault. We're going to the core." Minutes later, the crew geared up and made their way down into the heart of the city. The walk was somber, each step weighed with the knowledge of what they were about to face. There was no way back after this. As they entered the core chamber, the glowing walls of the ancient structure seemed to pulse with life. The power resonated throughout the room, and the sheer energy in the air was palpable. Jackson glanced at his crew, seeing the resolve in their eyes. They weren't just fighting to save their own lives, they were fighting to protect everything they had ever known. "Let's finish this," the captain said. They worked quickly, setting the charges and preparing the system to overload the core. But just as they began the final phase of their operation, the walls began to tremble violently, and the lights flickered. "No," the engineer yelled. "It's too much. The core is trying to overload on its own. We have to move faster." But just as the final countdown started, a low, familiar hum filled the room. It was the same hum that had preceded the destruction of the alien fleet. The weapon had detected their interference, and now, it was working against them. Jackson's team scrambled to finish the process, fighting against the growing instability. Time was running out. In a final, desperate push, Jackson hit the final sequence with seconds to spare. The city shook violently as the core released a massive burst of energy, the power surging through the system and creating a shockwave that reverberated across the galaxy. Back aboard the warship, the crew watched the distant explosion on their screens, feeling the impact. The ancient city, once a weapon of mass destruction, was no more. Its power had been neutralized, but so had everything around it. Jackson turned to his crew, a sense of relief washing over him, but it was tempered with loss. Parker's sacrifice had been honored, but at what cost? As the warship drifted through space, the captain stood by the viewport, gazing out into the void. "We did it," he whispered. The crew gathered around him, each of them quietly processing what had just transpired. "And what have we learned?" Jackson asked, his voice thoughtful. "We learned that humanity can face any challenge," the engineer said quietly. "Even in the face of impossible odds, we find a way to survive. We are the last line of defense for everything we hold dear. We don't just give up. We fight."